Good morning. We are here at the regularly scheduled Transportation and Public Works Committee. I'm Councilmember Reich. I'll be chairing today. I'm joined by my colleagues. We are a quorum, Councilmember Yang, Council Vice President Glidden, and Councilmember Gordon. We can proceed with today's business, which we have a pretty full agenda. We have 21 items, several consent items, public hearings, and discussion items. We'll get right to the consent items. Any committee member can pull them as they see fit. Starting with item 3 on the consent agenda, the agreement with MnDOT for landscaping improvements at Triangle Park. Item 4, the agreement with MnDOT for landscaping improvements along I-35W. Details are in your packet. Item 5 is the agreements with MnDOT for cost participation in public infrastructure design for the I-35W and Lake Street Access Project. The necessary resolutions to proceed with that project are listed. Item 6 is the agreement with MnDOT for Central Avenue and University Avenue traffic signal and pedestrian ramps. Item 7 is the contract amendment with Waste Management Incorporated for transfer station operations services for the amount and time listed. Item 8 is the 2016 Met Council Regional Solicitation for Federal Transportation Funds. That will be referred to the Ways and Means Committee, as well as item 7 and 9, downtown pedestrian improvements, intent for use for tax-exempt bonds to proceed. And that, I think we have expenditures not to be reimbursed by any other sources other than the tax-exempt bonds. There's a provision of that item. Item 10 is the 4th Street Southeast, and that's 25th Avenue Southeast to 29th Avenue Southeast Reconstruction Project, layout approval and easement. Item 11 is a similar project from 29th Street, Bryant Avenue South to Lyndale Avenue South, and that's a phase 1 of a total project. Item 12 is the 3rd Avenue South project, which is 1st Avenue Street to 16th Street East, also a reconstruction project with parking restrictions. Item 13 is the Bridge 9 Pier 3 repair project over in the river there. Item 14 is the special Boulevard permit. That's approving a permit for the application submitted by the 5th Street Ventures Sisyphus Taproom Microbrewery to pave a portion of the boulevard at 712 Avenue with concrete pavers. Item 15 is the Bassett Creek Watershed Management Commission appointments. We have 3 people that we'll be appointing. They're listed. Item 16 is the bid for 7th Street Reconstruction Project, and that'll be accepting a low bid for that project to move forward. Item 17 is the bid for the West 54th Street Reconstruction Project, and that's also accepting a low bid. Item 18, well, actually, I think it's in our discussion item. So those items, 4 through 17, are our consent items. Does anyone wish to pull them for conversation or further discussion? Seeing none, I submit all for approval. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Dissenting, nay. We can now go into our public hearings. Item 1 is our first, and that's a land sale. Good morning, Director Cerny.
Good morning. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Bob Boblet will present on this item.
Mr. Chair, committee members, I'm Robert Boblet with the right-of-way section. The division is Transportation, Engineering and Development. The item before you today is a disposition of several real estate parcels, all in the same general vicinity. We were asked to convey them to a developer for a multifamily residential project currently underway. One of the parcels is 2900 Grand Avenue. That is a parcel that needs to be reconveyed to the state. It was a tax forfeited parcel. The other 2 are owned in fee by the city of Minneapolis, and which we intend to sell directly.
Thank you very much. Any questions per the presentation? I see none. I will open the public hearing. Does anyone wish to speak on this matter? No one signed in. Anyone wish to speak? See none, I'll close the public hearing and move approval. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Dissenting, nay. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now we move to our other public hearing, which is the Stormwater Management Program and Annual Report. Director Cerny.
Elizabeth Stout with the Division of Surface Water and Sewers will make the presentation.
Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Wright and council members. I'm Elizabeth Stout with the Public Works, Surface Water and Sewers, and I'm here today to talk to you about the city's stormwater management program. The city and the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board are co-permittees of the city's stormwater permit. One of the permit requirements is an opportunity for public input on our stormwater management program each year before we submit our annual report to the Pollution Control Agency, and that's the purpose of today's public hearing. But first, a little bit of history. The national focus on cleaning up our waterways came with the passage of the Federal Clean Water Act in 1972. At that time, the primary focus was controlling industrial pollution. One of the most significant events that led to the passage of the Clean Water Act was the Cuyahoga River fire in Ohio. The picture above was taken during the 1969 fire, but that wasn't the first or the last time that river literally went up in flames due to industrial pollution. While it started with regulating industrial discharges, as time passed, the Clean Water Act evolved and cities and large construction projects fell under its purview. In a fully built city like Minneapolis, some rain that falls soaks into the ground, but most stormwater runs off into an extensive network of pipes and ponds and eventually discharges into the Mississippi River or into one of our many lakes or streams. As stormwater flows over hard surfaces, it can pick up pollutants. And under the Federal Clean Water Act, Minneapolis, like other cities, needs to manage the stormwater to keep pollutants from degrading its water bodies. This management is done under the municipal stormwater permit that's administered by the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency. Departments across the city and the Park Board have responsibilities for carrying out parts of this permit. In other years, you've learned about some of the specific components and responsibilities of the city under this permit. Today, however, I want to talk to you specifically about coordination and cooperation with other entities and the partnerships that the city has built with outside agencies to help us more effectively carry out our permit responsibilities. And I'll be discussing some of the activities that we completed in 2015. The Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board, as the co-permittee with the city, is our greatest partner in the area of water quality. Their operations touch on public education, water quality monitoring, pesticide and fertilizer control, and urban forestry. One of the many education events that the Park Board sponsors is the annual Earth Cleanup Day. In 2015, cleanup events were held at 38 sites across the city, and this event is a collaborative effort between the Park Board and Minneapolis Solid Waste and Recycling. Nearly 8,500 pounds of trash, 620 pounds of recycling, and 1,500 pounds of metal were picked up as part of just this event in 2015. In addition to water quality education, Earth Day participants also learned about properly sorting recyclables, trash, and organics. The Mississippi River Green Team it's a 2-year employment and conservation program. Teens from Northeast and North Minneapolis make up the Green Team. They engage in daily hands-on environmental work throughout the summer. The Green Team is made possible through a partnership with the Park Board, the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization, and the City of Minneapolis Step Up program. This year's crews worked and learned alongside National Park Service Rangers, Park Board and city staff, and a public artist as part of their weekly education days to expose them to green career paths. In 2015, they also served as citizen scientists for the Minnesota Dragonfly Society. Each week, the teens caught and identified dragonflies at North Mississippi Regional Park and at Heritage Park. Dragonflies are an indicator species for assessing habitat and water quality in wetlands, riparian forests, and along lake shores. Integrated pest management is practiced by the Park Board and the city for management of pests on public property and parks and around stormwater treatment facilities. Integrated pest management is a management strategy that focuses on long-term prevention or suppression of pest problems, both plants and animals, but with a focus on minimum impacts to human health, the environment, and non-target species. An example of an integrated pest management program is the replacement for the city's existing Ash Boulevard trees. Over time, the ash monoculture is being replaced by a diverse set of new trees so that we aren't in the place to lose entire neighborhoods of trees to any future invasives, such as emerald ash borer, oak wilt, or Dutch elm disease. This is a long-term strategy for managing existing and future pests. Another example is using burning as a technique to eliminate invasive species and encourage native plant growth around city stormwater ponds, like the Camden Pond in 2015. The Park Board also completes stormwater monitoring. One type of monitoring is carried out at 4 representative sites throughout the city. These sites represent 4 distinctly different types of land use, and monitoring the water that flows out of these small subwatersheds helps the city and the Park Board to quantify the pollutant loads that would come off of these land uses. The second type of monitoring is what we call BMP monitoring, or best management practice monitoring. This is tracking the performance of specific water quality facilities in the field to determine how effective the practice actually is. It can help us determine the best locations for specific practices, as well as optimize continuing maintenance activities. An interesting site that I'm showing here is the 37th Avenue North Greenway project. It was a flood control project that also incorporated water quality best management practices. In addition to the large underground flood vaults, the city installed what's called an iron-enhanced sand filter. The city is partnering with the Park Board and the Minnesota Pollution Control Agency to complete the monitoring on this. What it'll help us do, because the sand filter is such a new technology, it'll actually help the state quantify the type of pollutant removals that they'll see for future installations. Another interesting example is the Lyndale Farmstead Dog Park near Lake Harriet. This location, the Park Board is monitoring to determine the amount of bacteria, or E. coli, that's actually coming out of the dog park. A future monitoring effort will involve collecting information on macroinvertebrates. Macroinvertebrates are small bugs that live in our streams. Some are more tolerant of stream pollution than others, so categorizing the diversity and type provides an assessment tool for water quality that looks beyond basic water chemistry. Macroinvertebrates are also a seminal species and are the foundation of the food chain. They're an important food source for fish, frogs, salamanders, snakes, and birds. The Metro Blooms organization started off as the city's Committee on the Urban Environment, also known as CUE. The committee was disbanded and reorganized as a nonprofit organization known as Minneapolis Blooms. When its work began expanding outside of the city, it became Metro Blooms to better describe the work that they do. Once again, in 2015, the city partnered with Metro Blooms to hold rain garden workshops throughout the city, and over 200 residents attended and learned about rain garden installations and water quality. Since 2007, there have been over 180 rain gardens installed on private property as a result of these workshops, and over 500 rain gardens installed as part of larger neighborhood-based projects. The city also partners with organizations such as Boy Scout troops, neighborhood associations, and classrooms to collect trash and educate the public about stormwater quality as part of our storm drain stenciling program. In 2015, 175 people participated in this program and painted over 550 catch basins while collecting trash and debris from the stormwater system. A new initiative in 2016 will be our Adopt a Drain program. This program encourages residents to adopt a storm drain in their neighborhood and keep it clean from trash and debris. This program is useful for educating everyone that what we put in our streets and what goes down our storm sewer ultimately ends up in our lakes, streams, and the river. Another area where partnerships are important is in detecting and eliminating illicit discharges. Whether it's leaves, grass clippings, cigarette butts, motor oil, paint, construction debris, these pollutants are all considered to be illicit discharges. Any resident, staff, or official should report spills or other pollutants in our streets or waterways to 311. However, once a spill has occurred and gotten into the city's storm sewer system or into one of our lakes, creeks, or rivers, then cleanup efforts are needed. The city's Department of Regulatory Services operates a boat for use on the Mississippi River and other Minneapolis water bodies. Regulatory services and public works staff are trained in river deployment of booms and have field experience in placement of both containment, and they have years of experience on the water. In 2015, the Minneapolis Fire Inspection Services conducted 3 days of boat training as far as spill response and containment on the Mississippi River. They partnered with the fire department, the public works, the U.S. Coast Guard, Hennepin County, and the MPCA for this type of training. Fire Inspection Services and their boat also partners with the MPCA and the Mississippi Watershed Management Organization to conduct outfall sampling as well as visual inspections of all of our outfalls from our public system into the river. The city also partners with the 4 watershed management organizations that are located throughout the city: Bassett, Minnehaha, and Shingle Creek, and the Mississippi River Watershed Management Organizations. An example of a partnership project with one of the WMOs, as they're called, is the stream restoration of Bassett Creek through Theodore Wirth Park. While this section of the creek isn't located within the city, it does run through the park board property and is directly upstream of Minneapolis. The purpose of this project was to improve water quality and prevent future erosion and protect existing public infrastructure, as well as just improve the natural aesthetics and wildlife habitat of this section of Bassett Creek. The next phase of the Bassett Creek project will involve looking at the downstream sections of the creek. The creek sections we'll be looking at are adjacent to the Fruin Mill site, just south of Glenwood Avenue North, and from the Cedar Lake Road to the entrances of the old and the new tunnel, just past the Van Wyck Bridge. The purpose of this project is to repair and stabilize the stream banks to minimize the amount of erosion along Bassett Creek and to protect the property of upland owners. At this time, I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration, and I'd like to invite any questions.
Any questions per the presentation? Councilmember Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This was very helpful. I wondered, for some of these smaller projects, like, for example, it's not small, but some of these like street right-of-way projects, like the 37th Avenue North Greenway, how were those projects identified? Were they part of another project, or were they identified because of the stormwater management benefits?
Chair Wright and Councilmember Bender, I'd like to invite Lois Eberhardt with Public Works, Surface Water, and Sewers to answer that question. Thank you.
Good morning, Lois Eberhardt. Councilmember Bender, the 37th Avenue North Greenway was one of our flood projects that stemmed from the 1997 flood report. And unlike many of the flood projects in Minneapolis that displaced homes, some damaged from the flooding, and created large stormwater ponds that are park-like with their amenities, the 37th Avenue North Greenway took an existing road. It happened to have few utilities, almost no driveways, almost no addresses fronting that road. Took out the roadway, put in some huge underground storage tanks for 5.5 blocks. Then the amenity value is the bike trail that was put on top of the storage tanks, and then rain gardens that are aside the bike trail on both sides. So worked closely with the residents. It has some pluses and minuses for how they get out of their driveways, whether or not they have a sidewalk versus a bike trail. So a very interesting project, very expensive project, and the main cause was the flooding in the area.
Question. I have a follow-up question, actually. It's probably more of a public works question. So whenever there's a reconstruction project, I hear from constituents about an interest in doing more sustainable stormwater management practices. And I think there's probably some opportunity there, but we also are looking at our whole water system. So can you talk about how we identify opportunities within reconstruction projects for how we're managing stormwater within our right-of-way?
Certainly. Our local surface water management plan is a document that's part of the city's comp plan that comes around every 10 years. The existing one is from 2006, and we're working on that now. And that identifies that we have many stressors that we're dealing with. So we're dealing with water quality issues, flood, localized flooding as a result of capacity. We deal with lingering combined sewer overflow issues, infiltration and inflow, expectations from the Met Council. And so my point is that when we have something that's going to lead to a construction project, and this of course also includes roadway projects, we look at all the stressors and see if we can, usually there's one that is leading to the capital project, but there are others that may influence. What other benefits can we get from this project? Then, as far as water quality, we have our permit through the MPCA, which comes from the Clean Water Act. We have our city ordinances, and so that has requirements for if a significant amount of impervious surface is being added to the street, then that triggers some stormwater management. So it's a complicated sort of flow chart to what makes up a project. And in addition, now we're modeling the entire city for the flood projects, which then there'll be some analysis about where is it critical for the receiving water bodies that are perhaps impaired, meaning that they have excess pollutants, or for other reasons, where do we emphasize water quality in the city, in some places more than others because of these different critical stressor factors. As far as citywide approaches, I think that the downtown realm improvement plan, there are different documents that look at what does greening mean, what is green infrastructure, and where is the best cost effectiveness, which kinds of projects and which kinds of locations.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And then just to be clear, is the plan to update that along with the comprehensive plan?
That's
I think
correct.
that's what you said. But okay. And then I just wanted to note, as we look at climate change, our city is very at risk for the impacts of climate change related to flooding and some of these water issues, which I know our staff knows. And I think that's part of why being part of this Resilient Cities grant hopefully gives us some opportunities to use those resources to address this work. So it's a big deal. I'm just really thankful for the work you're doing. And I think it's going to become increasingly important. It's one of these sort of invisible things that Public Works does. And I think it's going to become more and more visible, unfortunately, as we all react and deal with the issues of climate change. So thank you.
Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you. I appreciate the presentation too, and all the education and outreach that's going on. And I think that just demonstrates how people have maybe finally caught on that this is an interesting and important issue, and they want to do more. I think it took a long time for rain barrels to kind of catch on and rain gardens, and now people are wanting to install them. And I like this adapted drain idea. I think it's significant. I think there's a real opportunity here to catch some of that and maybe push this even further. I know that in the second ward, there's people who want to do more different and newer things that we've had trouble figuring out, even looking at how they could put in bump outs, or when they actually do some boulevard work on a street, how could we make that also serve to treat stormwater and serve that function. And there's a sense that some of those are so small, they might not really add up and make a big difference because they can't manage that much water. But there's also a sense that if we had lots of small ones, even though it might take a lot to get them in, we could be managing a lot of water. I've also got a group now in the Prospect Park North. There's a University Avenue Innovation District, and there's lots of new development coming in, and so there's property owners that are developing now. We've I think given them the okay, and we've got funding from some of our partners in stormwater management to do a shared system. So a lot of the water is going to be managed from a number of properties on one site, which I think is really significant. And I'm glad we're doing that. So I hope as we're developing the plan, the next versions and the updates to our program, hopefully we'll incorporate some of those ideas in there. I did notice you also had one slide about pesticides and insecticides, which is another area where there's been a lot of interest. And I don't think we really have a clear policy, or maybe I'm hoping we can clarify our policy with the park board, even about applying pesticides and insecticides on boulevards and other areas. Do you think there's a chance that our updates can include some more direction around pesticides and insecticides?
All right, Chair Wright and Councilmember Gordon, we can certainly look into that. I know that the integrated pest management is really trying to look at pest management, both plants and animals pests, from a holistic and using less as far as chemicals and looking at other strategies. But we can certainly take a look at that with the park board. I can make a note of that.
Okay, because right now my understanding is that we and the park board allow people to apply whatever they want as long as it's legal, and even some of the things that are legal. What's that? Is it glyphosate? What's it put in Roundup? Which now many countries have actually banned, but of course we aren't doing it here yet. But that can be applied, and then we have other neighbors who object to that. We've also had the emerald ash borer problem, where if people are willing to get their own applications, I believe, as long as they're injecting it properly, the park board's letting them do that too. And there's reason to believe that's actually harming pollinators because it's systemic and it gets in the entire plant. But so I know that there's also preemptive state law that says what we can and can't regulate, but I still think we could clarify some policies, and especially if we work with the park board over parkland and the schools. So did you want to just clarify?
And that was the comment that I wanted to make, is that private property, the city and the park board can certainly educate and advise, but we can't restrict. But then on city property, school property, public housing, and park board property, we do have what we call integrated pest management strategies that try to emphasize mechanical means, pulling weeds, and so on. Chemicals still have a place and are very carefully applied. We use contractors that are certified. So, and as mentioned with climate change, we expect even more invasive species, both bugs and plants. So it's a complicated environment that we do work on pretty faithfully to try to make sure that we're causing no harm, but we're controlling species in the stormwater ponds, for example, so that the plantings are doing the job that they were put in to do, so that they're not overrun by a species that's not useful for the function of the pond.
And of course, I'd like to change state law so that localities could have a little bit more authority to regulate some of these things, because we've seen some really dramatic impacts, especially with bee kills that are going on because somebody decides they're just going to spray for their foundation because they want to. And also, I do want to note that we did pass our own city resolution, so we now made the commitment, none of the city property, our fire stations, police stations, even at the convention center, they're phasing out the use of any insecticides, which I think is at least good role modeling for the park board. But that's enough of that. I got a little, when it took us off on a little tangent.
But a tangent still germane to the conversation, so I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other questions or comments for the presentation? I will comment. I think it's a good conversation to have, and I know staff always works to try to manage the system and some of the mandates we have from above, which if we don't toe the line could be very expensive for us and very challenging for us to upkeep. And I know there's been a real steady plan to have funds in advance of the work and to make sure that we have a constant flow. And so with that, I think it's very important to note that, these things play a real function and real needs. And the challenges, as Councilmember Bender, are not going to decrease. They're only going to increase. The old 100-year flood or 100-year rain those are old numbers. And I think the new numbers are out and new calculations. And if we have a stress system that we can barely keep up with the mandates that we have, and of course our sense of infrastructure responsibility and asset management, if we have more challenges, we have to be very mindful of our resources. So, I really am not a believer in token projects. The projects have to serve a real function. They're not just cool things because they had it, we've got to have it. We have to take leadership here and sort of be very, very defensive with the funds that we do have to make sure that they perform and do the right thing for our water bodies. So I think this has been a very informative presentation. I invite it every year so we know what we're doing, and I think this had a nice flair to it because it really showed our partners. We got great infrastructure, great scientists, great best practices. We test, we do all the numbers, but every slide there's people, kids, youth, all these groups, you name it, that are involved. And I think that's a powerful set of assets that we have that I don't know if every municipality can bring that much help. And the help really drives those projects. And I know some of the community groups who do want to do smaller sort of micro projects that might not add up to a system impact, they step up and they do their little fundraiser and they get the youth to come out and the football team does the digging and we have these little projects, and those projects may not amount to much from a systems perspective, but boy, to I think Bender's point, it gets the awareness out there to something that would be out of sight, out of mind. So I really like this presentation because it had that literal human face to it. So I thank you. No further questions. I'll open the public hearing. Anyone wish to speak or comment? Anyone wish to speak or comment? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and move approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Dissenting nay. That carries. We have now finished our public hearings and can move into a series of discussion items, each of great interest, starting with item 18, which is the Minneapolis Pedestrian Advisory Committee and Bicycle Advisory Committee 2015 Annual Report. Director Cerny.
Mr. Chair, Matthew Deardahl will introduce the topic, and then we'll have Greta Ahlquist with the Pedestrian Advisory Committee and Nick Mason with the Bicycle Advisory Committee also present.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Matthew Deardahl. I'm the Bicycle and Pedestrian Coordinator for Minneapolis Public Works in the Transportation Planning and Programming Division. I appreciate the opportunity to introduce this topic today. This is an annual report of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Bicycle Advisory Committee for the City of Minneapolis. I've really been looking forward to this topic. It's one of my favorite parts of the job to be able to interact with these committees. And I just want to let you know that we have fantastic committees here in Public Works that help advise the city, the park board, and then us as staff as well. So I wanted to acknowledge and thank the chairs that you'll hear from in a minute, Greta Ahlquist and Nick Mason. But I also wanted to thank Julia Curran and Neil Baxter of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee for coming today, and then all the other members as well. So the annual report that you have before you for each of the committees shows the work that the PAC and the BAC have been working on over the past year and maybe like 4 months. So it's the 2015 report. And you can see that there's just a lot of different actions, both in terms of policy and infrastructure items that they work on. Before we get to the annual report, I just wanted to provide a few pedestrian and bicycle examples that we've been able to implement, some fun things in the bike ped section that we've been able to implement with the help of the pedestrian and bicycle advisory committees. And I want to start with on the pedestrian side. And I want to acknowledge Mackenzie Turner-Bargan, who you'll hear from in a little bit on her great work in the Parklet program, and then street cafes, which you'll hear about a little bit. But we also do a lot of work identifying locations for better crossings. So whether it's curb extensions or LPI or durable crosswalks, that's a lot of the things that we're focusing on in the pedestrian realm outside of just the other capital projects that we work with on a daily basis. Second, I guess initiative that I want to highlight is our Safe Routes to School program. This is also a fantastic program that Forrest Hardy works on a lot with in partnership with Minneapolis Public Schools, Department of Health, and then others. And this is just an example of some of the infrastructure projects that we're working on. But also Safe Routes to School is a much broader program than just infrastructure and focuses on really like encouraging and educating kids and youth to bike and walk to school. And then finally, on the bicycling side, I want to acknowledge Simon Blensky and Rebecca Hughes for their work on some of these resurfacing projects and protected bikeways. I don't know if everyone realizes how great our resurfacing program is in terms of implementing bicycle projects. I don't think other cities around the nation do it to the extent that we do in Minneapolis, and we've been sort of acknowledged nationally for that. So basically, when we have resurfacing projects, we always try to match it up to the bikeway plan, bicycle master plan, and implement those projects opportunistically. And so I think that's just a really cool part of it. And then obviously protected bikeways is a big program here in Minneapolis, and we have a lot of those going on as well. So again, I wanted to include some pictures of the actual committees. This is what I think of when I think of the advisory committees. We often go on walks or bike rides to actually look at the projects that we're advising. The groups are smart, strategic, passionate about biking and walking. And so the annual report is an opportunity for them to address you on the work that they've been doing. But I think it's also an opportunity for us to thank them for their service to the city. And then I think the only other thing that I want to acknowledge is that a good part of the structure of the advisory committees is we also have really great representation from other agencies in Minneapolis. So Hennepin County Metro Transit, Met Council, the Minneapolis City Council, CPED Health Department, Minneapolis Police Department, and so on. And so at these monthly meetings, we have an opportunity for our appointed members and our agency staff to interact on these projects. And I think that it just is a really helpful component. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce Greta Ahlquist, Chair of the PAC, and Nick Mason, Chair of the BAC. And given that we've recently passed a complete streets policy with modal priority, we thought it would be appropriate to go with pedestrians first. So Greta Ahlquist.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. My name is Greta Ahlquist, and I am chair of the Pedestrian Advisory Committee here in Minneapolis. And I want to begin by just saying how proud I am to work with the committee members that I get to work with. Our PAC is comprised of individuals who are thoughtful and well-informed. We are all experts in walking because we walk every day, some of us with, some of us without mobility devices. And we all do it with thoughtfulness for the residents and guests of our city, and also with compassion for our most vulnerable users. I also want to acknowledge that each of us in our own way are endeavoring to be technical experts as well. So I am just going to highlight only a few of the things that we've done in the last year, starting with our strategic plan. As a committee, we began developing a strategic plan in order to bring intention to our work and our resolutions, and prioritize the initiatives that we wanted to address in the coming year. We organized our strategic plan based on 6 E's: engineering, encouragement, equity, evaluation, enforcement, and education. We also wanted to help frame and inspire some of our strategies. So once we had a draft of our strategic plan, we invited a national expert in pedestrian planning and design to visit our city. Pete Lagerway came to us from Seattle. He is a national expert who recently won a White House Champions of Change Award for his 30+ years of experience working in the field, including developing and refining road diets back in the late 90s. The walkable community workshop that he facilitated included staff, council members, and PAC members. We did a walk together, and then it was followed by an in-depth design and policy discussion about things that have worked really well nationally and around the world for walking that may be a good fit for Minneapolis. So some of those outcomes are included in our strategic plan, specifically addressing speed, universal design, and WOW projects, which I think will be brought to you at another time. Another important aspect of the PAC is our attention to the importance of maintenance and also accessibility for all of our residents and visitors. This is a little bit personal for some of our committee members, specifically those who have limited mobility in the winter time. Sometimes our attendance decreases because of the challenges that winter maintenance conditions pose for some of our members. So we know that we can do better as a city. So the PAC always has an eye to ADA, accessible pedestrian signals, good temporary pedestrian access routes and construction projects, and we are happy to bring those recommendations forward to you. We are also thrilled to see that the city began a pilot data collection program for winter conditions for biking and walking, and many of our members volunteered to collect that data this season. We have 2 subcommittees. One of them is the Infrastructure and Engineering Subcommittee. And I won't get into the number of projects that our committee members have reviewed over the past year because the list is a bit too long. But I think that the key takeaway here is the amount of research and thought that goes into every resolution that our committee passes on infrastructure projects. For example, this is an image of Park Avenue, which we visited in conjunction with the BAC in order to really look and see what certain dimensions felt like, because we were going to pass a resolution about Hennepin Avenue, and there were some similar components. So we really wanted to make sure that when we are making statements and taking positions about projects, that we are as well informed as possible. Our Projects and Policies Subcommittee is a really nice complement to our Engineering Subcommittee. This is a place where, as our Engineering Subcommittee sees patterns emerging in projects, our Policy Subcommittee can kind of help look at maybe there are policy changes that could help improve things longer term and more systemically. I would say that our biggest accomplishment and pride we have in one of the city's accomplishments is the passage of the Complete Streets policy. One thing that we all have in common is that at some point we are all pedestrians. And so we're very pleased to see that the pedestrians are the top modal priority in the Complete Streets policy. And I also want to take a moment and thank Nathan Koster from Minneapolis City staff, who was right there with us as we met as subcommittees and outside of our committee work and outside of work hours to workshop some of the language. He was there right with us. And I think that's one of the reasons that the policy was so strong. We also understand as a PAC that it's not just public works that affects the pedestrian realm. We understand that land use and zoning play a huge role, which is one of the reasons we're really happy to have a lot of interagency collaboration as well as interdepartmental collaboration. Our committee is used to thinking holistically, not just about the street or the land, but both together. And that's one of the reasons we're really pleased to see CPED at every single one of our meetings in addition to public works. Finally, I know that in order to work towards making Minneapolis the best walking city in the United States, that really relies on strong working relationships with your committee and other departments in the city. And I would welcome any ideas that you may have about how we can support each other in this work. And I would be remiss if I failed to keep my promise to all PAC members who specifically requested that I invite each of you to go on a walk with any or all of our committee. We are happy to talk about any issues, projects, or answer any questions you may have for us today or on a walk later. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions per the presentation? I will take you up on that walk. Any excuse to get out of the office? It sounds like a good one. Well, thank you. And I think all the committee members here, know that having what you suggest, this professionalism, this expertise, and you take real deep dives on a topic that once you go deep enough, it does broaden out. You just don't have that singular use. And I think you evolved into that kind of committee, and we're all the better for it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Bender, and followed by Councilmember Gordon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Maybe I could say this at the end, but I think that the PAC has really evolved by leaps and bounds over the past few years, and I really have noted that and appreciate just kind of how the communications are coming out in a really clear way that's actionable. And then I think another thing that's very noticeable is the new emphasis on collaboration between the Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Bicycle Advisory Committee. And I think we're past those days when it used to be there's a little bit of road left over for biking and walking, and you can fight over who gets it, and that was frustrating, I think, for everyone. I know from personal experience, having served on the Bicycle Advisory Committee. And I think we were really intentional, 5-6 years ago to try to start building those bridges. And that work has just blossomed under your leadership, and Mr. Mason's leadership, and staff has really been there to support that synergy and connection between all of us are in there together. When you bicycle, you walk. And I think there's strong support in the Bicycle Advisory Committee for walking safety. And I know now, I think everyone's really working together project by project, but also on the policy work, like the Complete Streets policy, to make sure that we're really emphasizing both biking and walking. So I appreciate that very much.
Councilmember Gordon.
Yeah, I just wanted to thank you and the committee for all the work this year and prior years also. I also appreciated getting invited to some of the strategic planning and the walk around City Hall. That was very, very nice to be included in that and get to go on that and see that. I've also taken the opportunity to bring some ideas or things that I was working on to the committee, and it's been very helpful to get their input too. Some of those things we never really still haven't got to the next level, so there's some areas I'm interested in moving on, but it's been very helpful. I appreciate that and the work of the committee, and I look forward to a year of more effective partnership.
Councilmember Glidden.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Well, I agree with Councilmember Bender. It's been really interesting to see how this committee has grown in terms of sophistication, in terms of kind of figuring out how to navigate what sometimes seems like a very complicated way of working within the city departments and structures and all those kinds of things. And so I just wanted to acknowledge I can really see that the committee is solidifying kind of what are the rows and ways of working that seem to be most effective. And I think you're continuing to add, to that collection of strategies. I will say I still feel like there's a few growing pains, and I hear that sometimes in committee members that reach out and just say, I wish I saw our work reflected more in X or in Y. And so it could be a whole variety of things. And so I think that's just, again, part of the evolution of this committee process, and also for city staff and kind of understanding how best to utilize the expertise of this committee, along with, how that complements the professional staff's ability to look at projects and analyze and do all those different kinds of things. I will say I feel like kind of in the city as a whole, I wish we have a lot of communication emphasis on the bicycle projects, and maybe that's my ear is tuned to it a little bit more, or maybe it feels, like these are the sexy projects or whatever. And I think for us to continue to figure out how do we emphasize the importance of the pedestrian things that we're doing, that we're trying. There are quite a few new things that we are doing that are intended to advance how we're prioritizing the pedestrian and pedestrian safety. And I feel like we could hear that a little bit more, or maybe ourselves communicate that a little bit more. And that I think in turn kind of helps you with the influence of your work. I mean, it sort of is a little bit of a churn there, I think. But this is definitely an issue that is critically important. How do we continue to prioritize the pedestrian, especially as our city grows more crowded, as our the ways that we want to get here and there are changing with a lot more walking. And so I just want to say thank you. I really appreciate that you continue to kind of press us and press staff with how do we think differently about our work. I think it's very important. So thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Councilman Burton, did you have?
Yeah, so I just wanted to say one more thing, and I think I would say the same to the Bicycle Advisory Committee. We're all really proud and noted the significant step of the Complete Streets policy. And it's a brief document, it's concise, and it's packed with guidance. But it's also, I think we're at risk for just continuing to do what we've always done and kind of set it over here and say, great, we did that. So we're going to really be dependent now on the Pedestrian Advisory Committee and the Bicycle Advisory Committee to help us watch that and be careful and be vigilant and make sure that we're actually implementing and following through on that policy. And I know there's going to be some more documents that are coming up and some checklists and those kinds of things. But as projects come through, you can really help us by remembering the policy and having it next to you as we're reviewing those and moving forward so we can pull it off. And that's